All right, let's jump right in. We're going to be talking about the silent guardian of your digital world, the firewall. But, in an age where threats are getting incredibly sophisticated, the old way of doing things, it just doesn't cut it anymore. Today, we're going to break down the evolution of this crucial piece of tech into what we now call the next-generation firewall.
For the longest time, the whole idea was pretty simple. Just imagine you had a security guard standing at the front door of your network, and his job was to check IDs. Based on a really basic list, he'd look at where traffic was coming from and where it wanted to go, specifically which port or which door it was trying to use. If it was on his list, it came in. If not, it stayed out. It was straightforward, it was effective, and for a good while there, it was all we needed.
But here's the thing. Here's the problem. What happens when the bad guys stop trying to just kick down the door, and instead they get smart? They learn how to dress up like the good guys. What happens when a threat can put on a disguise, walk right up to that security guard, and use a perfectly legitimate door to just stroll right inside? Well, that's the challenge that changed absolutely everything. And that gets us right to the heart of the problem with that older technology. The very rules that were designed to keep us safe started to become the exact loopholes that threats would use to get in.
So check this out. On the left, you've got your traditional firewalls. They see the world in terms of ports. Web traffic uses port 80, secure web traffic uses 443, and so on. But then you look to the right. Modern applications, they're slippery. They can hop between ports, they can use standard trusted ports to completely hide what they're really doing. An app can make itself look like totally normal web traffic, and that old security guard, he'd just smile and wave it right on through.
And this slide right here, this just nails the problem perfectly. Take a look at the left side. The rule is super simple. Allow port 53. Well, legitimate DNS traffic uses that port, but so does a file-sharing app like BitTorrent. The traditional firewall just looks at the port number, says, yep, that's port 53, and lets them both through. It literally cannot tell the difference. But now look at the right. The next-gen firewall doesn't just see the port, it identifies the application. It sees the DNS traffic and says, you're good, come on in. Then it sees BitTorrent, recognizes it's not supposed to be there, and bam, it's blocked. Instantly. So, if the old guard can be tricked, what do? Well, you get a new one, a much smarter one that's way more aware and has a whole new set of tools to see right through all those disguises. And that, my friends, is the next-generation firewall, or NGFW for short. Think of it as the third-generation model. I mean, it still does all the basic stuff a traditional firewall does, but then it adds these absolutely critical new layers. It inspects the application itself, it actively works to prevent intrusions, and, this is key, it's aware of who is actually using the network. All right, so let's break down its abilities, starting with its first real superpower, the ability to see the true identity of any application running on your network. This is a technology called App ID. So with App ID, it just doesn't care what port an application like YouTube, Skype, or Salesforce is trying to use. It has this whole toolbox of techniques to look at the traffic itself and say, aha, I know exactly what you are. It can tell the difference between you watching a funny cat video and an employee using some risky file-sharing app, even if they're both trying to sneak through the same port. Now, here's what's so cool about how this works. App ID isn't just one single thing. It's actually a combination of clever techniques. It uses signatures, which are kind of like a fingerprint for an application. It decodes the protocol to understand the language the app is speaking. And it uses heuristics, which is basically just a fancy word for behavioral analysis, to identify apps it's never even seen before. It's pretty smart stuff. And this whole process is called deep packet inspection. It's like our new security guard doesn't just glance at your briefcase, he actually opens it up to check what's inside. So as you see here, the traffic comes in, it gets classified, the protocol is identified, and then, even if it's encrypted, the firewall can actually look inside and identify the specific application. That's how it tells the difference between, say, voice chat and email and peer-to-peer file sharing. But, knowing what is on your network is really only half the battle. To be truly effective, security needs to know who is on the network. And that brings us to the second superpower, user ID. Think about it. In the old days, security just saw an IP address, a string of numbers like 10.0.0.277. Kind of meaningless, right? But user ID changes all that. It actually integrates with your company's user directory and maps that anonymous IP address to a real person. So now, the firewall doesn't just see some random device, it sees Paul from engineering or Nancy from the marketing team. So the big takeaway here is that you're no longer writing security rules for machines, you're writing rules for people. And this allows for policies that are so much more granular and just
make more sense. You can create rules based on a person's actual role in the company, not just whatever computer they happen to be using that day. So why is this such a game changer? Well, there are three huge reasons. First, visibility. You actually know what your users are doing. Second, policy control. You can say, hey, the engineering team can use these specific tools, but the finance team absolutely can't. And third, reporting and forensics. If something bad does happen, you know exactly who is involved, which just dramatically speeds up how you respond to an incident.
Okay, so we've identified the application and we've identified the user. The final superpower brings it all together by looking at the most important part of all, the actual content, the data being sent back and forth. This is Content ID.
So at this point, our security guard is looking inside every single package that goes by. Content ID is actively scanning that data stream for threats like viruses and spyware. It's looking for malicious URLs and blocking them on the spot. And it can even be set up to look for sensitive data patterns like credit card numbers or social security numbers to make sure they never leave your network when they're not supposed to. What this really does is it turns the NGFW into a proactive threat prevention engine. It's not just a passive gatekeeper anymore. It's an active inspector constantly scanning for a huge range of threats and policy violations in real time, right as the traffic flows through. So when you put all of these pieces together, App ID, User ID, and Content ID, you get something that is so much more powerful than a simple wall. You get a complete modern threat defense strategy. And it really all comes down to these three pillars. You have to know the application, you have to know the user, and you have to inspect the content. By combining these three core elements, a next-generation firewall finally gives you the context, the full story that you need to make intelligent, effective security decisions. And this right here really drives home the new way of thinking. See, security isn't just a single event, it's a continuum. And NGFW helps you before an attack by letting you enforce smart policies and harden your network. It protects you during an attack by detecting and blocking those threats in real time, and it helps you after an attack with incredibly detailed logs and forensics to figure out what happened and make sure it never, ever happens again. Which kinda leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The NGFW was the answer to the failures of the past, and it was designed for the threats of today. But as the attackers keep innovating, and as things like artificial intelligence enter the fight on both sides of the fence, it really makes you wonder, what new superpowers will define the next generation of our digital guardians?